when everything around you begins to fall apart, when the people you trusted walk away, and when life feels like a maze with no exit, there's one truth that can anchor your soul. Faith in God. It doesn't mean storms won't come. It means you'll survive them. Faith is not about having all the answers, it's about trusting the one who does. In the silence, in the confusion, in the nights when tears won't stop falling. That quiet whisper in your soul urging you to keep going, that's faith, and it's not blind. It sees what eyes can't. Faith sees purpose in pain and growth in delay. Faith in God is not just for good days, it's especially for the days you feel like giving up. When your plans shatter, remember, maybe they had to so God's better plan could unfold. You may not feel strong, but faith isn't built on feelings, it's built on surrender. When you release control and let God guide your steps, peace follows. Not always immediately, but surely. Faith doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stay. And when it stays, so do hope and healing. Life is full of trials, designed not to break you, but to build the strength inside you that you never knew existed. And that strength, it begins with faith. Faith that no matter how many doors close, there's a greater one waiting to be opened by God's hand. Faith that your tears are seen, your cries are heard, and your struggles are never wasted. When the noise of the world gets too loud, it's faith that silences the chaos within and reminds you that God is still in control. It's easy to trust when things are going well, when prayers are answered instantly, when the path is lit clearly ahead. But faith is proven when the answers don't come, when the silence is deafening, and still you choose to believe. That's the real essence of trust, not seeing the whole picture and still moving forward. Knowing that God is the artist painting the masterpiece of your life. You've probably been in a place where it felt like everything was crumbling: health, relationships, finances, even your own sense of self. And in that moment, your strength couldn't carry you, your knowledge couldn't guide you, your friends couldn't help you. But somehow, you made it through. Somehow, the night ended, the storm passed, and your breath returned. That somehow was faith. That invisible force that wrapped around your broken spirit and whispered, "Keep going." It wasn't logic. It wasn't optimism. It was something deeper. It was God holding you when you didn't even know He was there. Faith doesn't always make life easier, but it makes it bearable. It doesn't remove the pain, but it gives purpose to it. It tells you that every season has a reason and every setback carries seeds of growth. You don't need to have extraordinary strength. You need an extraordinary God. And when your heart is anchored in Him, you begin to rise, slowly but surely, above the waves that tried to drown you. There will be days when you feel like you're drowning in questions. Why me? Why now? Why this? Faith doesn't always answer those questions immediately, but it gives you the courage to ask them without losing your peace. It allows you to wrestle with your reality while still holding on to hope. And that hope is powerful. It becomes the light in your darkness, the compass when you're lost. Faith whispers that God is still writing your story. And just because a chapter is painful doesn't mean the whole book ends in tragedy. It tells you that detours are not dead ends. They are divine redirections. Sometimes what we think is the end is really the beginning of something greater. Faith helps you see that. It shifts your focus from what's missing to what's possible. It teaches you to believe in breakthroughs even when you're surrounded by breakdowns. And this belief, this inner knowing that God is bigger than your pain, begins to transform you. You stop looking outward for validation and start looking upward for strength. There's something beautiful about reaching the end of yourself and finding God there. That moment when you admit you don't have it all figured out, when your pride crumbles and your hands rise in surrender, is when faith is born in its purest form. Not as a feeling, but as a decision to let go of fear and cling to the one who formed you. Faith is not about pretending everything is okay. It's about trusting that even when it's not okay, God still is. It's about leaning into His promises when your circumstances make no sense. It's about believing in the unseen, the unheard, the unfelt, because you know that the God who created the universe is also orchestrating your life with precision and purpose. And even though you can't see the full picture now, you can trust the hands that hold the brush. Every delay, every detour, every disappointment, they're not punishments. They're part of the process, and faith lets you see the process Through eyes of trust rather than bitterness, faith in God changes how you live, how you think, how you react. It changes your language. You stop saying I can't and start saying God can. You stop asking what if it all goes wrong and start declaring even if it does. God is still good. That's what faith looks like. Not perfect behavior, but perfect surrender. Not absence of struggle, but presence of divine strength. You start waking up differently. Challenges don't scare you as much because you know who walks with you. The weight on your shoulders doesn't feel as heavy because you've learned to shift it onto God. That's what the Bible meant when it said, "Cast your burdens on the Lord, and He will sustain you." Faith is casting again and again until your hands are free to embrace peace. You stop panicking at closed doors because you trust that if God shut it, He has something better planned. You begin to see waiting not as punishment, but as preparation. You don't just endure the wilderness. You begin to learn in it, grow in it, thrive in it, because you know you're not walking alone. The desert seasons become places where your roots go deep, where your trust is refined, where your identity is no longer based on achievements or applause, but on the unshakable truth that you belong to God, that you are seen, known, loved, and chosen. Faith redefines success. It's no longer about how much you've accomplished, but how much you've obeyed, how closely you've walked with God even when the road was rough. Faith doesn't glorify struggle, it dignifies it. It sees beyond the pain to the purpose, and in doing so, it makes your trials sacred. You stop resenting your past and start respecting it because without it, you wouldn't have discovered the depth of God's grace. Every scar becomes a testimony, every failure becomes a lesson, and every step forward becomes an act of worship. There's power in believing before you see, in praising before the breakthrough, in choosing joy while you're still waiting. Faith doesn't make sense to the world, but it makes miracles possible. It moves you out of victimhood and into victory, not because everything changes overnight, but because you've changed. Your perspective has shifted. You no longer rely on external validation, you're anchored in eternal truth. God becomes not just your creator, but your comforter, your guide, your friend. You speak differently, you think differently, you expect differently, because faith has rewired your heart to believe that even the worst situation is still under God's sovereignty. And that kind of belief can't be faked. It's forged in the fires of adversity. It's built in the quiet moments when no one sees you crying, praying, choosing to trust instead of run. And over time, that faith becomes your strength, your identity, your lifestyle. You stop chasing peace in people, possessions, or places and begin to find it in the presence of God. You learn that even if everything around you is unstable, your spirit doesn't have to be. Faith gives you spiritual equilibrium. It balances your emotions. It keeps you grounded when life tries to uproot you. It reminds you that your value isn't in your achievements or appearance, but in your alignment with the one who formed you. And when your life becomes aligned with God's will, amazing things begin to happen. Not always flashy, not always immediate, but always meaningful. Opportunities align, relationships heal, strength returns, not because you forced it, but because you trusted. And when you trust, you rest. That rest brings clarity, and clarity brings wisdom. Wisdom to discern what to fight for and what to surrender. Wisdom to know when to speak and when to stay silent. When you live by faith, your spirit becomes more sensitive. You begin to see divine patterns where others see coincidence. You hear God's whispers where others hear silence. You walk in peace where others walk in panic. This is what it means to have faith in God. It's not religious duty, it's a daily decision. It's not rigid, it's relational. And it's not for the strong, it's for the surrendered. It's for those who are tired of carrying everything alone and are finally ready to let God carry them. Faith doesn't promise a life without storms, but it promises a steady hand through every one. It promises that even in your weakness, God's strength is made perfect, that even when you fall, His grace catches you, that even when you doubt, His love remains constant. You don't have to be fearless, you just have to be faithful. Even if all you have is a flicker of belief, God can fan it into a flame. You don't have to figure it all out, you just have to take the next step. Because every step taken in faith is a step closer to the life God has for you, a life of purpose, peace, and power that the world cannot offer. This kind of life doesn't come from striving, it comes from surrender. And it begins the moment you stop depending on yourself and start depending on the God who created you for more than survival. He created you to thrive in faith. You don't find faith in comfort, you find it in chaos. That's why broken hearts often beat the loudest with belief. When the world says it's over, faith whispers it's just beginning. God isn't looking for perfection, He's looking for trust. Faith in Him is not a formula, it's a relationship. It's waking up to uncertainty and still choosing to believe He's working all things for your good. Doubt will knock, but faith answers. And sometimes, faith is just getting out of bed, praying with a tired heart, and walking forward even when your knees shake. God never said it would be easy, He said He'd be with you. And that makes all the difference. The presence of faith doesn't eliminate fear, it just means fear doesn't get the final word. Because when God is involved, miracles are never far. What looks delayed might be divine preparation. What feels like rejection might be redirection. Faith teaches you to stop asking why me and start asking what now, Lord. You grow when you stop seeing obstacles as punishments and start seeing them as setups for something sacred. It's in the moments of deep pain, when everything feels uncertain and unpredictable, that the essence of real faith begins to form. Faith is not just what you say when you're standing in the light, it's what you hold on to. When you're sitting in the dark, life will break you just enough to make you reach for something deeper than yourself, something eternal. Faith is that lifeline, that rope pulling you out of waters you thought would drown you. It's not dramatic or loud, it's quiet, still, strong. Sometimes it's not even a shout, it's a whisper. God, I still believe. And sometimes, that's all you need. Faith doesn't mean the pain goes away immediately, or that things instantly get better. Faith means you carry your wounds with hope. You walk through storms with the knowledge that you're not alone, and you trust that every step is leading you somewhere meaningful, even if you don't understand it now. Real faith requires vulnerability. It asks you to admit that you're not in control. It asks you to surrender not out of weakness, but out of wisdom, because only when you let go can you be carried. And God doesn't carry you halfway. He carries you all the way through. There's a sacred strength in choosing to believe when everything in you wants to run. That moment when you stand in the middle of your fears and still say, God, I trust you, is one of the most powerful acts of faith. It's not that you don't feel the fear, it's that you choose to move despite it. And with every faithful step, your spirit grows. You start to realize that the very things meant to break you are the things God is using to build you. Faith doesn't always prevent the fire, but it ensures you won't be consumed by it. It's what keeps you walking when there are no signs, no answers, no guarantees. It's what pushes you to keep praying even when heaven seems silent. Because deep down, faith knows something your eyes can't see, that God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating, arranging, preparing. And one day, what felt like a delay will look like divine alignment. What felt like abandonment will look like protection. What felt like failure will look like grace. But faith believes this long before it sees it. Every person who's ever done something extraordinary in this world has had to walk through seasons where their faith was the only thing they had left. It's in the wilderness, not the spotlight, that faith grows. It's not applause that strengthens your spirit, it's adversity. You don't become unshakable by avoiding pain. You become unshakable by facing it with belief that God is greater. There will be days when you don't feel like praying, when the weight of life presses on your chest like a stone. On those days, faith doesn't demand big actions, it invites small, quiet trust. Maybe it's just saying a single word, help. Maybe it's listening for God in the stillness, refusing to numb your soul with distractions. Maybe it's staying soft when life has given you every reason to harden. That's the power of faith that keeps you tender even after you've been wounded. It keeps you hopeful even after you've been disappointed. It keeps you kind even after life has been cruel. Because faith isn't based on circumstances, it's rooted in the character of God. Faith rewires your perspective. You stop interpreting your life based on what's happening, and you start interpreting it based on who God is, and who He is never changes. He is faithful when others aren't. He is present when you feel alone. He is good even when life is not. When you understand this, everything changes. You no longer need constant reassurance or visible results to stay grounded. You realize that stability doesn't come from success, it comes from surrender. The more you trust, the lighter your burdens feel, because you're no longer trying to carry them alone. That's why Jesus said, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Faith gives you that rest, not a vacation from trouble, but peace in the middle of it, not an escape from reality, but strength to face it with, divine courage. And in that peace, you discover clarity. You begin to see that God's no is not a rejection, but a redirection. That His silence is not distance, but a deeper kind of presence. Learn to wait without whining, to trust without trying to manipulate outcomes, to believe without demanding timelines. And when that happens, you change. You stop trying to prove yourself and start resting in who God says you are. You stop trying to fix everything and start allowing God to transform everything. And slowly, gently, you're molded into someone new. Not perfect, but faithful. Not flawless, but grounded. Not invincible, but resilient. And that resilience becomes your strength. You find yourself standing taller, loving deeper, living freer. Not because life is easier, but because you're anchored in something eternal. When storms come and they will you bend, but you don't break. When disappointments knock, and they will you feel them, but you're not destroyed by them. Because faith has built something stronger in you than anything the world can shake. Faith is also what keeps you connected to your purpose. When you want to give up, when you can't see the point anymore, faith reminds you that your life still matters, that your story still has value, that your presence still carries weight. You're not an accident. You're not forgotten. God didn't start something in you just to abandon it. The same hands that formed the stars formed you with intention, with beauty, with calling. And when you choose faith, you step back into that purpose. You don't have to understand it fully to walk in it. You just have to say yes, one yes at a time, one moment of obedience at a time. And those small yeses become the path that leads to divine destiny. Faith says, "I may not know where this road ends, but I trust the one who's leading me." And that trust leads to freedom. Freedom from comparison, from anxiety, from self-doubt. Because your worth is no longer based on performance, it's based on identity. And your identity is rooted in God. Even when you fail and you will, faith picks you up. It doesn't shame you for falling. It reminds you that grace is still available, that redemption is still possible, that nothing is too broken for God to restore. Faith turns your scars into stories, your wounds into wisdom, your mess into a message. And that message isn't just for you, it's for the people you'll meet, who are still in their dark place, wondering if God still sees them. Your faith becomes a light for others, not because you've done everything right, but because you've kept believing when it was easier to stop. That kind of faith is contagious. It spreads healing. It spreads hope. It speaks a different language, one that says, yes, it's hard. Yes, it hurts. But yes, God is still good. And that message can change lives, because we don't need more perfect people, we need more people who are willing to be honest about their pain and still proclaim God's faithfulness. Every time you choose faith, you're making a spiritual declaration that God is bigger than your fears, your failures, your frustrations. You're saying, I believe in what I cannot see, because I trust in who I know God to be. And that belief shapes your actions. It influences your decisions. It elevates your life. You begin to live intentionally, no longer drifting aimlessly. You start showing up differently in your relationships, in your work, in your dreams. Faith fuels you to try again, to hope again, to love again. And love, by the way, is one of the purest forms of faith, because to love deeply in a broken world requires you to believe that goodness is still possible, that healing is still available, that hearts can still change. Faith in God gives you the capacity to love without fear, to give without expecting, to serve without complaining. It transforms you from the inside out, and in that transformation, you begin to reflect the very nature of God. The beauty of faith is that it grows. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be a spiritual giant. You just need to be willing to believe, even when you're scared, willing to try, even when you've failed before, willing to show up, even when you don't feel like it. And as you do, faith deepens. It becomes less about outcomes and more about intimacy with God. You stop chasing blessings and start chasing His presence, because you realize that the greatest gift isn't what God gives. It's who God is, His peace, His love, His nearness. That's what your soul craves. And when you taste that, you'll never be the same. You'll never settle for shallow living again. Because faith takes you deep into God's heart, into your own soul, into the lives of others, and in that depth you find fulfillment, not from fame, not from fortune, but from knowing you're living aligned with heaven. This is the journey faith calls you into. It's not always comfortable, but it's always worth it. It's a path marked by both tears and triumphs, but every step is holy, because every step is taken with God. And there's no safer, sweeter, stronger place to be than in the center of His will, walking by faith, even when you don't yet see where it leads. Have you ever been in a season where nothing made sense, where you prayed and waited, but the answer didn't come? That's where faith stretches. That's where spiritual muscle builds. God doesn't always give you what you want when you want it, but He always gives you what you need to become who you're meant to be. Faith holds you together when logic fails. It keeps you still when panic says run. It is in these wilderness moments where you learn to walk by spirit, not sight. And sometimes, faith is just breathing through the unknown and saying, Lord, I trust you anyway. Your future is not in the hands of people, luck, or circumstance. It's in the hands of the Creator. Faith teaches you to rest in that truth. Even if the door doesn't open today, you're still walking toward something holy. Your delays are not your dead ends, they're divine reroutes. Every step of faith, even when small, is recorded. Heaven watches when you trust even while trembling. And you may not see the harvest yet, but faith keeps planting anyway. The waiting season is often the most difficult, not because you're idle, but because your heart is doing the heavy lifting. It's in these unseen battles, in these hidden sacrifices, where faith is truly forged. You pray, but the silence feels louder. You knock, but no door swings open. You give, but receive nothing in return. And yet you continue. You show up. You believe. You refuse to let the unanswered prayers define your faith. Because faith is not transactional. It's transformational. You're not putting in effort to earn something. You're surrendering so you can become someone. God uses waiting not to punish, but to prepare. While you're waiting for the breakthrough, He's working on your foundation. While you're hoping for a change in circumstance, He's developing your character. And that development often takes place in the dark, in the quiet, in the stillness where no applause or validation can reach you. That's when you learn to trust, not because you feel like it, but because you've decided to. And that decision turns into discipline. That discipline turns into devotion. And that devotion becomes the anchor of your soul. Faith is not a feeling, it's a stance. It's the refusal to be moved by what you see or what you lack. It's declaring with your actions that God is still worthy even when life isn't easy. It's praising when you're in pain. It's serving when you feel unseen. It's believing in the purpose behind the pressure. And in time, faith reveals its fruit, not always in material blessings, but in spiritual depth. You begin to see things differently. You start interpreting your situation through the lens of eternity instead of urgency. You stop rushing the process and start respecting it. Because now you know that what God is doing in you is more important than what you're trying to get from Him. You're learning endurance. You're gaining wisdom. You're shedding layers of pride, impatience, and fear. And in their place, faith begins to build something unshakable. Psalmodies, the most powerful declaration of faith, isn't I believe for a miracle, but I will still believe even if the miracle doesn't come. That level of trust breaks chains inside your soul. It frees you from the pressure of results and lifts you into the peace of relationship. Because faith isn't about manipulating outcomes, it's about trusting God's heart. And God's heart is always for you, even when His hand feels hidden. He sees the tears you cry behind closed doors. He understands the battles you face that no one claps for. And He honors the quiet strength it takes to keep walking when the way ahead is blurry. That's why the Bible says we walk by faith, not by sight. Because sight can lie. Sight sees giants, but faith remembers God's power. Sight sees delay, but faith knows about divine timing. Sight sees the grave, but faith anticipates the resurrection. It's a different way of living, a higher dimension of existence, where you're no longer led by your senses, but by your spirit. And this way of living changes everything. You stop panicking over what's not working and start praising for what is being worked out behind the scenes. You begin to understand that even closed doors are acts of mercy, that sometimes the unanswered prayer is the greatest gift, that the pain you begged God to take away is the very tool He's using to refine you. Faith lets you trust the fire because you know the flames are in God's control. You no longer fear what's coming next because you've made peace with who's already gone ahead. Faith removes the pressure to figure it all out and replaces it with permission to simply follow, to walk in obedience even when you don't know the outcome, to take steps without needing all the steps mapped out. That's the freedom faith offers. It releases you from needing control and introduces you to the beauty of surrender. And the beauty of surrender is that it invites divine strength. When you admit you can't, that's when God shows you He can. When you stop striving, He starts moving. When you let go of the pen, He writes a better story. But surrender isn't easy. It requires courage. It requires humility. It requires the willingness to release your timeline, your expectations, your definition of success. Because faith isn't about getting what you want. It's about becoming who God wants. And who He wants you to be is always greater than what you're clinging to. The more you trust, the more you're transformed. You start loving more deeply, not because others deserve it, but because grace has taught you how. You begin forgiving quicker, not because the pain is gone, but because you no longer want to carry it. You live lighter, freer, more focused, not because life is easier, but because faith has made your heart stronger. Faith doesn't ignore reality. It transcends it. It doesn't pretend the pain isn't real. It simply refuses to let pain have the final word. Faith speaks life in the valley of shadows. It declares hope in the face of heartbreak. It says, even if everything around me changes, I will not be moved, because God does not change. That's the kind of stability this world is desperate for. Not shallow inspiration, but deep conviction. Not temporary excitement, but eternal endurance. And that kind of faith is cultivated over time. You don't wake up one day with unshakable faith. You build it one test at a time. Every trial, every temptation, every tear is an invitation to grow deeper. To choose trust over worry, gratitude over grumbling, praise over panic. And with every decision, your faith is strengthened. It's not about having perfect faith. It's about having persistent faith, the kind that shows up even on the worst days, the kind that chooses to worship with weary hands, the kind that believes God is still good, even when life isn't. Because if you only have faith when it's easy, it's not faith, it's convenience. Real faith walks through the fire and says, even here, I believe. And that belief becomes your armor. It guards your heart from bitterness. It protects your mind from despair. It lifts your eyes from what's broken to who is still present. You begin to look for God in the details, in the way the sun rises, in the smile of a stranger, in the peace that makes no sense. You realize He's been there all along, not just in your victories, but in your valleys. And that realization becomes your revelation. God is not a distant observer. He is an ever-present help, a comforter, a healer, a guardian. When you know that, truly know that, you stop chasing signs and start seeking Him. You stop demanding outcomes and start desiring intimacy. Because faith, at its core, is about closeness, not getting God to move on your behalf, but moving your heart closer to His. And the closer you get, the more your heart aligns with His will. Your prayers shift from God, change my situation, to God, change me through this situation. And that shift is where miracles begin, not always around you, but always within you. Because the greatest miracle is not a changed life, but a transformed heart. A heart that beats with courage, with joy, with peace, not because circumstances are perfect, but because God is present. You'll still have questions, you'll still face doubts, but faith gives you the ability to carry your questions without losing your confidence, to hold your doubts without letting go of hope. Because faith doesn't require full understanding, it just requires full surrender. And when you surrender, you gain access to divine strength, strength to endure, strength to love, strength to wait, strength to rise again. You stop measuring your progress by what's visible and start measuring it by what's eternal. By how you love, how you persevere, how you trust. Because in the end, it won't be your possessions or positions that matter, it will be your faith. The quiet, steady, Resilient faith that carried you when nothing else could. Faith is not about being fearless, it's about being faithful, and faithfulness is often unseen. It's the decision to keep showing up, to keep praying, to keep believing, even when you feel empty. It's choosing obedience over outcome, purpose over popularity, presence over performance. It's understanding that your value isn't tied to your success, it's rooted in your identity as a child of God. And that identity can never be shaken. When you live from that place, everything changes. You're no longer striving to prove yourself, you're living to reflect the one who made you. You're no longer chasing applause, you're walking in alignment. And in that alignment, you find peace that surpasses understanding, joy that defies circumstances, strength that renews you daily. So when life doesn't make sense, when the prayers seem unanswered, when the waiting feels unbearable, remember that faith is not failing, it's being formed. In the silence, in the stillness, in the unknown, something sacred is happening. You are being molded, shaped, and strengthened, not for the easy path, but for the eternal purpose. And that purpose is worth every moment of trust, every tear of surrender, every breath of faith. Because God is not finished. He is faithful. He is present, and He is using every moment, every struggle, every silence to lead you deeper into His heart, where your faith is not just tested, it's transformed into something eternal. Sometimes the greatest test of faith isn't in the storms we face, but in the silence that follows. It's easy to trust God when blessings pour like rain, when life flows smoothly, and when prayers are answered almost before they're whispered. But true faith is forged in the silence, when nothing moves, nothing shifts, and the heavens seem locked tight above you. That's where many stumble, not because they don't believe, but because they expected faith to be a constant feeling, a daily reassurance. But the truth is, faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper, sometimes it's choosing to get up one more day without a sign. It's holding on to hope when your heart feels hollow. It's walking through a desert and believing that even if you can't see the oasis yet, it's still ahead. People often confuse the absence of visible movement with the absence of God, but that couldn't be further from the truth. The seed buried underground looks lifeless, yet it's undergoing transformation. Likewise, God often works in the unseen, in ways we cannot grasp, shaping outcomes we can't yet comprehend. This is why patience and faith are intertwined. One cannot exist without the other. Patience isn't just waiting, it's waiting with trust. It's choosing to believe that delay is not denial. It's understanding that a slow miracle is still a miracle. Many times, the delay is actually God preparing you for what you're not yet ready to carry. We pray for strength and expect to feel powerful instantly, but God sends trials that build endurance instead. We ask for peace and expect tranquility, but He teaches us how to stay calm in chaos. We beg for answers and expect immediate clarity, but He teaches us to walk even in the fog, because trust means believing even when you can't see 2 steps ahead. There's beauty in that blind surrender. There's transformation in that unseen trust. Faith is not a transaction where you pray and then instantly receive. It's a journey of becoming someone who can carry what they've asked for. A lot of people give up just before their breakthrough. They stop knocking right before the door was about to open. They give in to the noise of doubt, not realizing that even when nothing seems to be happening, everything is. Heaven is never still. Just because you can't hear God doesn't mean He's not speaking. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean progress isn't unfolding. It's in the silence that God tests the depth of our trust. Will you still believe when your feelings fade? Will you still pray when your emotions are dry? Will you still walk in purpose when the results don't show? That's where real faith lives, in consistency without confirmation, in movement without motivation, in love without reward. And that kind of faith shakes the heavens. That kind of faith draws divine intervention. When God sees you trust Him, even when you're tired, He honors it. When you worship Him with a broken heart, He treasures it. When you speak life while everything around you seems dead, He multiplies your words. Faith isn't meant to be logical. It's not supposed to make sense. If it did, it wouldn't be called faith. It's believing in a story God is writing even when you've only seen a few lines. It's trusting in His timing even when your watch is ticking too loud. It's surrendering the illusion of control and embracing divine alignment. Most people are uncomfortable with surrender because they associate it with weakness. But in God's kingdom, surrender is strength. It takes courage to let go. It takes trust to release control. It takes humility to say, "Your will, not mine." And yet, in that place of surrender, you discover peace that surpasses understanding. You find rest in the chaos. You find light in the dark, because you're no longer carrying the weight of figuring everything out. You're no longer bound to the pressure of performing. You're simply living in obedience, step by step, moment by moment. Some of the most powerful moments in Scripture came after long periods of silence. Before Jesus raised Lazarus, there was silence. Before the Red Sea parted, there was panic and silence. Before the resurrection, there were 3 days of mourning and silence. But silence is not absence. Silence is often the stage before the miracle. The enemy tries to use that silence to plant seeds of doubt. He whispers, "If God was real, why is he so quiet?" But remember, even teachers are silent during the test. Silence doesn't mean abandonment. It means you're trusted to walk on what you've already been taught. It means the foundation has already been laid, and now it's time to build upon it. It means you have matured enough to keep going even without immediate validation. And that's powerful, because when you can walk with God without needing a constant sign, that's when you've truly begun to walk in faith. And that kind of faith moves mountains. That kind of faith opens doors. That kind of faith breaks chains. We often think faith is about doing more, being more, praying more. But sometimes, faith is about resting in the assurance that God is who He says He is, resting in the knowledge that His promises are still true, even when your life feels like the opposite, resting in the quiet confidence that you are held, even when you don't feel it. Faith doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't scream for recognition. It simply endures. It simply believes. And in that silent endurance, God works wonders. He builds character. He deepens love. He rewrites destinies. Sometimes, the most spiritual thing you can do is simply not give up. Just one more step, one more breath, one more prayer. That's the essence of faith, not in the fireworks, but in the flickering flame that refuses to die. Not in the grand miracles, but in the daily decision to trust. You don't have to feel strong to be strong. You don't have to see the way to walk forward. You just have to believe that the same God who brought you this far won't leave you now. And even if you're trembling, even if your faith is the size of a mustard seed, it's enough. Because it's not the size of your faith that moves mountains, but the power of the one you place your faith in. Let that truth anchor you in the silence. Let it carry you when you're weary. Let it remind you that you are never alone. God is with you, not just in the answered prayers, but in the waiting, not just in the victories, but in the battles, not just in the noise, but in the silence too. And that's more than enough. There's a kind of pain that's so deep, it silences even your thoughts. A kind of heartbreak that leaves you staring into the dark, unsure if morning will ever come. You look around and everything feels distant, like the world is moving and you're frozen in place. People pass you by with their smiles and laughter, and you wonder how they do it, how they keep going, how they breathe when it feels like you can't. And in those moments, when words fail you, when tears are your only prayers, it's easy to believe you're alone. It's easy to think no one understands, no one sees, no one hears. But what if the silence you feel is not abandonment, but presence? What if the emptiness is actually space being made for something greater? There is a sacredness in heartbreak that the world doesn't talk about. It's in the quiet after everything has fallen apart, in the stillness that follows a storm, where something invisible begins to take root. It's not comfort, not yet. It's not understanding. It's something more fragile, more hidden. It's a nearness that doesn't announce itself, but holds you all the same. A divine closeness that meets you not in your strength, but in your surrender. Because when your heart is breaking, God isn't watching from a distance. He's closer than ever, closer than your breath, closer than your thoughts, not because you earned His presence, but because you needed it. He's not the kind of God who waits for you to pull yourself together before He shows up. He steps into your pain, sits with you in your sorrow, and listens to the words you can't say. You may not feel him, but he's there. You may not hear him, but he's listening. And even when all you can do is cry, he counts every tear like treasure. In the human world, silence often means indifference. But in the divine, silence is sacred. It's a space where hearts are gently mended, not with noise, but with love. There are moments in life when the only thing you can offer God is your brokenness. And that is enough, because God is not impressed by perfect words or flawless prayers. He is drawn to truth, to authenticity, to the heart that has nothing left but still says, I trust you. That's the faith that moves heaven. That's the surrender that draws miracles. People will sometimes leave you when you're hurting, not because they're cruel, but because they don't know what to say. They don't know how to sit with pain without fixing it. But God never leaves. He's not uncomfortable with your sorrow. He doesn't need you to pretend. He already knows your heart, and still, he chooses to stay. He stays through the questions, the confusion, the anger. He stays through the numbness and the nights when you can't sleep. He stays through the moments when you doubt everything, even him. And somehow, even when you're pulling away, he's drawing you closer, because that's who he is. A refuge for the broken, a comforter for the weary, a healer for the heart that's shattered in silence. What feels like the end to you may be the beginning for him. A new kind of faith is born in heartbreak, the kind that isn't built on outcomes or emotions, but on the quiet knowing that God is still God, even here, that he is still good, even now, that he is still love, even when everything hurts. Sometimes, the most powerful prayers are not loud declarations, but soft whispers in the dark. Help me, hold me, don't let go. And he doesn't. He never does. Even when the healing doesn't come the way you expected. Even when the answers don't arrive. He holds you through it. His presence is not always the loudest, but it's always the deepest. It finds the places no one else can reach. It sees the ache behind your smile, the heaviness in your laughter, the questions behind your silence. He doesn't demand you to be strong. He offers his strength instead. He doesn't expect you to always believe. He carries your doubt with compassion. He doesn't leave you when your faith falters. He draws near, because that's what love does. Real love, eternal love, love that sees your worst and stays anyway. Love that meets you not at your best, but at your lowest. And in that love, healing begins not always instantly, but always deeply. Maybe the heartbreak wasn't meant to break you, but to bring you back to him. Maybe the silence isn't a punishment, but an invitation. Maybe the pain isn't a curse, but a door that leads to something sacred, something eternal, something you never knew you needed. Pain has a way of stripping us down to our essence. It removes the masks we wear, the pretenses we cling to, the illusions we build, and what's left is truth. Vulnerable, raw, beautiful truth. And God meets us there, not to judge, but to embrace, not to lecture, but to love, not to fix us immediately, but to walk with us as we heal. Because healing is not always fast, it's not always clean. Sometimes it's messy and slow and filled with days where you feel like you're going backward. But every step, even the shaky ones, are seen. Every tear is noted. Every cry is heard. And not one moment of your pain is wasted. God uses it. He redeems it all. What was meant to break you becomes the very thing that builds you. What was meant to silence you becomes the very ground where your voice is born. What was meant to end your story becomes the chapter that transforms it. So don't rush your healing. Don't shame your tears. Don't compare your journey. Some wounds take time. Some hearts need silence before they can sing again. But even in the silence, even in the heartbreak, you are seen. You are held. You are loved. And that is more than enough to begin again. Not because the pain is gone, but because love remains. A love that does not grow tired. A love that does not give up. A love that sits with you in the dark until you're ready to step into the light. Again, and even then, it walks with you. One step, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. When life falls apart and your heart is heavy with the weight of pain, there comes a moment when even your voice disappears. You stop trying to explain what hurts. You stop hoping people will understand. You simply go silent, not because you want to, but because it feels like no one would hear you anyway. And in that silence, something deeper stirs. The soul begins to whisper prayers that no one else can hear. The tears become language. The ache becomes a cry. You may think you're alone in that moment, but you're not, even in silence and heartbreak. Allah hears you, sees you, and stays with you. He knows the weight of the words you didn't say. He understands the meanings behind your sighs. He reads the sadness in your eyes when no one else notices. There's a divine intimacy in suffering that no joy can replicate. In those moments when the world fades into gray and your heart feels like it's bleeding quietly, Allah draws closer. He is not like people who require noise, who want explanations, who need words. He is the one who listens to what's buried beneath your silence, the one who stays when others walk away. People may ask you to move on, to be strong, to smile again, but Allah doesn't rush your healing. He doesn't expect you to perform your pain. He is patient with your process. His mercy flows gently into your wounds. His compassion wraps around your broken pieces like a shield. And even when you can't pray out loud, even when you feel numb to everything spiritual, He knows your intention. He sees your struggle. He understands the exhaustion that comes from trying to keep going. It's in these silent storms where real transformation begins. When you've cried all you could cry, when the pain has drained you of emotion, when your faith feels shaky and your spirit feels weak, that's when something holy awakens. Not a burst of strength, but a quiet resolve. Not loud hope, but a small light that refuses to go out. It's the awareness that you are not carrying this alone, that somewhere beyond the clouds, a loving God is listening to your silence and calling it a prayer. He's counting your tears like pearls, storing them as precious gifts, responding not with punishment, but with peace. And while you may not feel His presence the way you used to, while the path may feel dark and uncertain, that does not mean He is absent. Often, His nearness is not loud. It's not thunder or lightning or miracles falling from the sky. Sometimes, it's simply breath in your lungs, the fact that you made it through another day, the way your heart keeps beating even when it's broken, the way you find a sliver of hope where you thought there was none. He doesn't need you to have the perfect words. He just wants your heart. And hearts are never more honest than when they're broken. Hearts speak the loudest in silence. That's when sincerity is purest. That's when the soul cries out in a language only the Creator can hear. And He does, always. There's no heartbreak that escapes His notice, no tear that falls without His permission, no ache that goes unseen. He knows your story better than you do. He knows what brought you here. He knows what you're trying to carry. And He knows how it ends, not with despair, but with mercy, not with failure, but with forgiveness, not with abandonment, but with love. When people leave because they don't understand your pain, Allah stays because He created your heart. When they stop checking in, He never stops watching over you. When you can't even explain what's going on inside of you, He already knows. And in that knowing, there's rest. There's a relief that comes from not having to be okay all the time, from being able to fall apart without fear of being judged, from trusting that even your weakest moments are held in the hands of the one who loves you most. Some wounds are so deep, words only make them worse, but that's okay, because you don't need to speak for Allah to hear you. You don't need to move for Him to come close. You don't need to prove your worth to be worthy of His love. His mercy is not conditional. His closeness is not based on your performance. He is near to the brokenhearted. He is with those who are wounded in silence. He sits with the grieving, the lost, the shattered, not to fix them immediately, but to be with them faithfully. And that's what gives your silence power. It becomes a sanctuary, a sacred space where only you and your Lord exist, where healing isn't rushed and love isn't forced, where you are seen fully and loved completely. There will be days when you still question, still doubt, still wonder if you'll ever feel whole again. But don't mistake those days for weakness. Don't confuse silence with abandonment. Sometimes silence is your soul resting in Allah's care. Sometimes it's the only way your heart knows how to heal. And healing is never linear. Some days you'll feel strong. Others you'll barely make it out of bed. But Allah is in both. He's in the strength and the struggle, the laughter and the tears, the clarity and the confusion. You are not expected to always be at your best. You are allowed to break, to grieve, to cry out without words, because the one who fashioned your heart knows exactly how to mend it. Every scar will speak of survival. Every tear will testify to your resilience. Every silent night will become part of your sacred story. Not because of anything you did, but because of who He is, the most merciful, the most compassionate, the one who stays. He doesn't leave when it gets hard. He doesn't walk away when the pain doesn't make sense. He enters into your silence, into your heartbreak, and brings light where you thought only darkness could live. So when all else fails, fall into that silence. Let it carry you to Him. Let your stillness be a sign of trust. Let your heartbreak be your offering. Because in the eyes of the world, silence may look like weakness. But in the eyes of Allah, silence can be worship, surrender, faith, love. A silent heart can be louder than 1,000 spoken prayers. A tear can be more powerful than a lengthy sermon. And a single breath taken in remembrance of Him can be more meaningful than hours of empty words. So don't despair in your quiet moments. Don't fear the stillness of your pain. Don't assume He's far away just because you can't feel Him. He's closer than ever. And He will not waste your heartbreak. He will not ignore your silence. He will not forget your suffering. He will turn your pain into purpose, your silence into strength, your heartbreak into healing. All in His time, all with His wisdom, all through His love. There comes a moment in life when everything seems to loud noise from the world, from people, from our own minds. The chaos makes it hard to hear what truly matters. But when everything is spinning out of control, that's usually when God is calling us to find stillness. Faith doesn't always speak in shouts. Sometimes it's a whisper, a feeling, a quiet knowing deep in your soul that even in this storm, you are being held by something greater. We live in a world that glorifies results, speed, and logic. But faith moves outside logic. It's trusting the process even when there's no evidence. It's waking up with a broken heart, but still choosing to believe that healing is coming. It's praying when it seems like no one is listening. It's believing you're not alone, even when you feel like the whole world has turned its back on you. Faith is what keeps you from giving up when everything in you wants to surrender. It's a strength that doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply whispers, "Try again tomorrow." That's the power of faith in God. It doesn't require proof, it requires trust. You don't always have to understand what's happening in your life. Sometimes you just have to understand that God does, and that alone should be enough to give you peace. It's hard to let go of control. As humans, we cling to plans and timelines. We create backup plans, contingencies, safety nets. But God often works outside of our expectations. What we think is a delay is actually divine protection. What we call failure, He calls redirection. What we mourn as a loss, He sees as preparation for something better. When we finally surrender our grip on how we think things should be, we make room for God to work how He knows things should be. And that's where miracles happen. That's where healing begins. When you stop trying to manipulate outcomes and instead open your heart to receive whatever God has written for you, peace follows. Faith isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward in spite of it. It's choosing to believe that even though the mountain looks high, the climb is worth it. It's standing at the edge of uncertainty and saying, "I don't know what's coming next, but I trust the one who does." That kind of faith creates a shift, not just in your spiritual life, but in how you approach everything: your relationships, your career, your dreams, your identity. Faith becomes the lens through which you see everything. And through that lens, you begin to realize that nothing is random, nothing is wasted. Every moment has meaning. Every delay has a purpose. Every closed door leads you to one that's better. The journey with God isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. When you walk with faith, you walk with purpose. You stop chasing validation and start standing in truth. You stop panicking when things fall apart and start praising, because you know God is building something better. You stop settling for surface-level existence and start diving into a deeper connection with the divine. Faith changes your posture. It lifts your chin when life tries to bow your head. It plants your feet when the world tries to shake you. It strengthens your spine when fear tries to paralyze you. It opens your hands when pain makes you want to clench your fists. Faith says, "I don't need to know the outcome. I just need to know who holds it." And that truth becomes your anchor. In moments of confusion, faith reminds you that clarity will come. In moments of despair, It reminds you that joy is possible. In moments of darkness, it whispers that light is on the way. Life tests faith not to destroy it, but to deepen it. Trials refine us. Pain teaches us. Loss strengthens us. And faith weaves through it all like a golden thread, binding us to hope, anchoring us in grace. We don't grow when life is easy. We grow when life is hard and we still choose to trust. We grow when we cry out and feel nothing but silence, and yet we still bow our heads. We grow when everything inside us wants to quit, but we keep going because something holy inside says, "Don't give up." That's faith, and it changes everything. It teaches you to stop waiting for the perfect moment to believe and start believing that every moment is perfect when God is in it. It teaches you to stop measuring your worth by how others see you and start measuring it by how God sees you, loved, chosen, enough. It teaches you to stop living from fear and start living from faith. This shift changes how you handle hardship. It's no longer about avoiding struggle, but about leaning into it, knowing that God is shaping you through it. You begin to see that your scars are not signs of weakness, but symbols of survival. You begin to see that setbacks are setups, that rejections are redirections, that endings are beginnings in disguise. Faith shows you that the valley is not a punishment, it's preparation, that the wait is not a waste, it's where God is working the most, that silence is not absence. It's sacred space where your soul learns to listen, and in that stillness, you begin to hear more clearly, not just your thoughts, but God's voice, not just your pain, but His promise, not just your fear, but His faithfulness. And suddenly, the noise of the world begins to fade, the fear begins to shrink, the chaos begins to calm. Because when you're walking with faith, you're never truly walking alone. God is with you in the unseen, the unknown, the undone. He's in the moments you overlook, the tears you cry in secret, the prayers you whisper in the dark. And He's not just watching, He's working. Faith opens your eyes to this unseen reality. It opens your heart to a deeper connection. It opens your spirit to transformation. And slowly, your life begins to shift, not because your circumstances changed, but because your confidence in God did. The truth is, you don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be willing to trust, willing to surrender, willing to believe that God's plan is better than your own. That's when faith becomes more than a concept. It becomes a lifestyle, a way of living, a way of breathing, a way of being. It becomes the thread that holds your life together when everything else is falling apart. And the more you walk by faith, the more peace you find. Because peace doesn't come from understanding everything. It comes from trusting the one who does. Faith transforms worry into worship, doubt into determination, fear into focus, pain into purpose. It doesn't promise an easy life, but it does promise a meaningful one. And in the end, that's what matters most. That you didn't just exist, you lived. That you didn't just survive, you trusted. That you didn't just go through life, you grew through it. And through it all, your faith in God became your light, your compass, your constant. That kind of faith doesn't need to shout. It speaks through how you live, how you love, how you show up. Quiet, strong, unshakable. A faith that whispers in the dark and still carries you forward. There's a moment in every believer's life when everything aligns. Not because the world outside has changed, but because the heart within has. That moment is often quiet, without fireworks or fanfare. It's when the soul fully surrenders and says, "I trust you, God, no matter what." That's not a moment of weakness. It's the ultimate demonstration of strength. True faith isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. It isn't measured by how many scriptures one can quote or how often one appears in a place of worship. Faith is felt in the stillness of early morning prayers, in the tears cried silently in the dark, in the decisions made when no one is watching, and in the relentless hope that refuses to die even when everything seems lost. Faith in God is the invisible anchor that holds the ship of life steady in stormy seas. It's the soft whisper that says keep going when all around you screams give up. The power of that faith doesn't lie in logic or explanation. It thrives in mystery. It grows strongest in pain. It flourishes when tested, not when praised. Most people seek proof before believing, but faith demands belief before proof. It challenges you to walk before the path is visible, to sow seeds before you see the rain, to love even when you're hurt, and to wait even when you don't know what's coming. When the weight of the world is crushing your shoulders and no one sees the burden you're carrying, faith sees. When your dreams seem to be slipping away and your efforts feel wasted, faith reminds you that no sincere prayer ever goes unheard. No effort ever goes unnoticed by God. There's beauty in walking blindly with God because every step is guided by trust, not by sight. And in that blindness, there's clarity that you were never alone, that the delays were divine protection, that the heartbreak was sacred redirection, that the silence was preparation, and that the loss was making room for something better. This journey of faith is not linear. Some days you'll feel invincible, overflowing with hope and energy. Other days, you'll feel broken, questioning everything you once believed. And that's okay. Faith doesn't mean never doubting. It means choosing to believe even while doubting. It's holding on to God's hand with trembling fingers. It's falling 7 times and rising 8. It's saying amen with tears in your eyes and trust in your heart. God doesn't expect you to be perfect. He only asks you to come back, to turn toward Him, to trust even when you don't understand. There will be seasons where it feels like God is silent. Prayers go unanswered. Doors remain shut, and you begin to wonder if you've been forgotten. But silence isn't absence. A teacher is often quiet during the test. God is not ignoring you. He's strengthening you. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. You're not being overlooked. You're being trained for something bigger. The very struggles you're enduring now may become the foundation of someone else's faith tomorrow. Your scars may become someone else's survival guide, and your endurance may be the light that leads someone else out of their darkness. To truly live with faith is to learn how to let go. Let go of control. Let go of the obsession with outcomes. Let go of the need to understand everything. That's hard, especially in a world that teaches you to hustle, to fight for your rights, to demand answers. But faith teaches surrender. Not passive resignation but active trust. It's when you show up, do your part, give your best, and then let God take care of the rest. It's when you stop trying to manipulate timing, force results, or chase after people who are not meant for your destiny. It's peace, not because life is perfect, but because you know the one writing your story makes no mistakes. Sometimes God's blessings come wrapped in disappointment. What you thought was rejection may actually be protection. What looked like an ending may be the beginning of something you never imagined. We often limit God by only praying for what we think is possible. But God operates in the impossible. He creates paths in the wilderness, turns graves into gardens, makes nobodies into legends. He doesn't just fix situations, He transforms hearts. That's the essence of faith. Not to ask God to change things for us, but to allow Him to change. You ask for the things He has already planned. Your life is not random. Your journey is not meaningless. Every tear, every trial, every delay has been orchestrated with divine wisdom. You may not understand now, but one day you'll look back and see how all the pieces fit. You'll see how the closed doors saved you, how the unanswered prayers matured you, how the seasons of loneliness brought you closer to Him. Faith doesn't promise ease, it promises purpose. And when you walk with God, even your suffering is sacred. Nothing is wasted. Not your pain, not your waiting, not even your failure. Everything is being woven into a masterpiece far greater than you can imagine. We live in a world that rewards instant results, quick wins, and visible success. But faith teaches a different rhythm. It's slow, deliberate, often invisible to the outside world. But it's deep, unshakable, eternal. When others chase popularity, faith pursues purpose. When others depend on money, power, or connections, faith relies on God alone. And while the world celebrates the loud and the flashy, God honors the quiet, consistent believer who keeps showing up, keeps believing, keeps forgiving, keeps loving, keeps praying even when nothing seems to change. You don't need to have everything figured out to trust God. You just need a willing heart. Start where you are. Bring your doubts, your fears, your broken pieces. He doesn't ask you to come perfect. He asks you to come real. And the more you walk with Him, the more you'll see miracles in the mundane. You'll notice grace in the middle of chaos. You'll find joy that doesn't make sense. You'll experience peace that defies logic. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll look around and see how far you've come, not because of your strength, but because of His faithfulness. Let this be the truth you carry forward. God is not far. He is near to the brokenhearted. He lifts up those who are weary. He sees the unseen battles and hears the quiet cries. And no matter how far you've wandered, you're never too far to come home. The arms of God are always open. His mercy has no expiration date. His love is not performance-based. He knew every mistake you would make and still chose you, still calls you, still believes in you. That is the kind of love you build your life on. That is the kind of faith that changes everything. Because in the end, it's not about what you achieve, what you own, or what the world says about you. It's about who you became in the process. It's about how much you loved, how deeply you trusted, how often you forgave, and how faithfully you walked. When all is said and done, may it be said of you, they lived by faith, they loved with courage, and they finished well. This is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning. Keep believing, keep walking, keep trusting, because with faith in God, anything is possible.